Hello everyone, Lawrence here from Unicorn Reviews with AMD's latest. You saw my unboxing hopefully, you saw my build video, and now I can finally talk performance in this review. So in this video I will be talking about overclocking potential on CPU and GPU. I will also be talking about benchmarks and game performance. A lot of graphs will be on your screen for that. And also I'm going to investigate how memory speeds and memory channels and amount of memories impact performance. It was only 11 months ago that AMD released the original Ryzen 7 and finally took some competition to Intel. But later on, when AMD released Vega, only the miners were really happy about it. So let's see if the combination of Vega and Ryzen is going to make something awesome. Just like last year with the Ryzen 5 1400, the 2400G comes with the Raid Stealth cooler. This one does not have a copper slug in the middle, and it doesn't have heat pipes or any of that stuff. However, it is still a very capable cooler with decent noise levels and good enough cooling to reach those boost levels. Now, about those boost levels, clock speeds have gone up tremendously compared to last year. So now we have a base clock of 3.6 GHz with boost up to 3.9 for the 2400G. However, because we have to get that Vega die on the same chip as the Ryzen die, that means we only use one CCX compared to two CCXs on last year's chips. What this means is effectively half the level 3 cache, so only 4 megabytes of level 3 cache on the 2400G. Also, very noticeable to me at least, is that there are only 8 PCIe lanes for the GPU compared to 16. Now this is still PCIe 3.0, so you have plenty of bandwidth for even the fastest graphics cards. Now something that luckily didn't change compared to last year is pricing. So the 2200G, which is replacing the Ryzen 3 chips, this one is under €100. Which is massive, also $100 for you Americans out there. And then for 170 of your favorite currency, you get the 2400G, a quad-core 8 threads with Vega 11 graphics for just €170, which is a pretty good offering. About these Vega graphics then, on the Ryzen 3 2200 you get Vega 8, so that's 8 compute units. And on the Ryzen 5 2400G with Vega 11, you get 11 compute units. And these run standard at 1250 MHz, but we'll see that we can clock those a bit higher later. So one last thing to talk about before we can finally dive into those performance numbers is the feature set. This is basically all the features of Vega combined with all the features of Ryzen. So this means you get that AMD pure power, you get Sense MI, you get neural net prediction along with all the Ryzen and Vega stuff. And this means that both the CPU and the GPU will clock themselves optimally so that you're always getting the best clock speeds with least power draw and therefore the least noise and heat. You can hook up as many monitors to this chip as your motherboard has connectors. Sadly, I only have a motherboard with 2 connectors, so I can't really test it with like 6 screens or something silly like that, but it should support it. Also, for those wondering about memory compatibility, it's rated stock at 2933 MHz DDR4, but the press kit comes with 3200 and you can actually push it quite a bit past that. So now we can finally get to the testing. I also tested it with the Raid Stealth cooler. It was good enough, but I wanted to push stuff a bit further as usual. So I have the MSI B350i Pro AC ITX motherboard. I tried it with my X370 Gaming 5 motherboard, but it wouldn't work, so I was only able to test on this motherboard. Once I can actually use it on like a high-end motherboard, I will be doing like an overclocking guide and that sort of stuff. I have 16 gigabytes of G.Skill memory in here, running at 3200 MHz, but for my testing I also ran it in single channel and I ran it at really low frequencies as well, and then I also used RAM disk to limit the amount of memory, but we'll dive into those results later on. Now for all my testing I set the GPU memory to 2 gigabytes. Now later on, they promised us at least, we will be able to set it to 4 or even 8 gigs of GPU memory, but for now 2 is the maximum that I could get. Now in my charts I'm going to show overclocked and stock performance, so let's start with overclocking this thing before I show any performance numbers whatsoever. I found that overclocking through the BIOS at this point in time was a nightmare, so I left the BIOS alone and I only overclocked through the Ryzen Master software. This means I could get up to 4 GHz on the CPU, and that's for both the 24 and the 2200G. It's basically the limit that we're getting with Ryzen chips. We saw that last year as well. 4 GHz is about as much as you'll get. And then for the GPU, so the Vega 11 and the Vega 8, I was able to overclock them to 1550 MHz. So that's a very nice 300 or 450 MHz boost, and it really had an impact on performance. So let's dive into the benchmarks first. Looking at our Cinebench multi-threaded numbers, they're really good. They're competitive with Intel and with AMD's last year's chips as well. And in single-threaded stuff, we can see that there's a little bit of progress being made, but nothing too mind-blowing. Geekbench shows a very similar story in both multi-threaded and single-threaded applications. You can see that the improved clock speeds really have a good impact here, but sadly, the decreased cache also has a bit of a negative impact, so it kind of cancels each other out. Synthetic benchmarks then, 3D Mark, Skydiver, the physics score is again along the lines of we would expect, and it's actually really impressive given the price. I mean, just look at the 2200G, a sub €100 CPU. It's holding out really well. The same goes for Firestrike. These scores are pretty much identical to each other. So moving to our GPU benchmarks then, Cinebench OpenGL. So this is testing compute performance, and we're getting insane performance from Vega 11 and Vega 8. These chips are outperforming dedicated graphics cards from NVIDIA. So the 1030 is a $50, €70 dedicated graphics card, which is actually a great buy, and a lot of people recommend it. But the Vega chips inside our Ryzen Vega processors are actually outperforming it in multiple test scenarios actually. Looking at Photoshop batch exports, I wasn't really expecting a lot here because Photoshop heavily favors Intel, and you can see that right here. Premiere Pro exports though, this is what I think is going to be important for a lot of you guys, gamers, streamers who want to upload a video every now and then. Basically, it's awesome to see that the combination of Ryzen and Vega with GPU acceleration is actually on par with a Ryzen 7 without GPU acceleration. So you're really getting a massive bang for your buck here. So with that out of the way, let's finally get into gaming performance. 3D Mark Firestrike. We're getting about 3 to 4 times what Intel has to offer with their latest HD 630 chips in their i7 8 series. Moving on to gaming performance then. This is the impressive stuff. Throughout the testing, the stock clocked Vega 11 was trading blows and actually beating the NVIDIA GT1030 most of the time. And even the Vega 8 with an overclock was able to keep up with that GT1030. Unigine Heaven, I think, is really important. So we're getting double the performance in games that we would be getting from the Intel chips. Even the 2200G on 1080p maxed out settings was getting 94 FPS minimum. League of Legends is perhaps even more impressive, the numbers here. So we are getting about 130, 150 FPS here, minimums. Overwatch is slightly harder to push, but that game too worked fine. And the same can be said for Rocket League, where we were getting between 40 and 60 FPS at all times. Another popular MOBA, DOTA 2, 60 FPS throughout the testing. Now, I also included City Skylines with a really big city because it kind of shows the issue you get with memory, as we'll talk about later, but it's a really CPU and really GPU intensive game. Now this is maxed out settings, so we're getting about 20 to 30 FPS maxed out. Now with modern AAA titles like Battlefield 1, it's still playable at 1080p, but I would recommend lowering it to 900p, which still looks okay, but it's a lot easier for the Vega 8 and Vega 11 chips to push. And because everyone keeps asking me for it, I did include Minecraft numbers as well, but the FPS is so high that really is irrelevant. Also, one of my favorite games ever, Portal 2, 100, 110 FPS is what we're getting here. And then one of the most played titles on Twitch, PUBG, it's playable at 1080p with very low settings. Again, I would recommend going 900p on medium settings, and then you'll get about 40 to 50 FPS. So as I said at the start of the video, to me it was really important to see how memory impacts CPU and GPU performance. So I first did it with the 16 gigs at 3200 MHz dual channel. I also went 8 gigs dual channel at 3200, and then I also went single channel 8 gigs at 3200, and then I did the same for the different speeds and different amounts of memory and different amounts of channels. Overall, we can see that memory does have an impact on CPU performance, but it's not as big as you might expect. Moving on to GPU performance though, there is a reason that AMD puts HBM memory on their Vega graphics cards. And here we can see that you have to buy dual channel memory. Even if you only get 8 gigs at a low speed, you have to get dual channel memory. I cannot stress this enough. If you go single channel, your performance will drop by a quarter, which is just not worth it. So get 2 4GB sticks, 2 8GB sticks. If they're at 2100 or 3200 megahertz, doesn't matter, but get 2 sticks for these chips. Now, a big selling point for these budget chips is the upgrade path. And AMD has this completely dialed, like it's super impressive. So I bought a Ryzen motherboard last year and it still works with the current chips. So if you, for example, buy the €100 2200G and 2-3 years along the line, you want to upgrade your system, you can just drop in a different CPU. And that can be the Ryzen 4800X or it can be a different chip. But there is incredible support for this AM4 platform up to 2020. So the upgrade path is really solid here. And the same goes for upgrading your graphics. So with previous AMD APUs, CPU performance was horrible, so you only really bought it for the graphics. This time, CPU performance is really good too, so you can put a 1050, a 1060, an RX 580, a Vega card in there, a GTX 1080 Ti, a Titan even, and it won't be bottlenecked by the CPU. So upgradability with this platform is awesome. Time for a conclusion then. Just like last year with the initial Ryzen launch, there were a few issues, but all of them have been solved, and I'm sure all the current issues with Raven Ridge will get solved as well. AMD really delivered a solid product here. For under €100, it's hard to go wrong with the 2200G. CPU performance is on par with what Intel has to offer, and GPU performance is 2-3 times as fast as what Intel has to offer. It's even beating out the NVIDIA GT1030, which is like the budget it will game graphics card of the moment. The only thing that can possibly hold back Raven Ridge, I think, is memory pricing. It's doubled compared to last year, and memory is super important because of the Vega graphics. You have to go and get dual channel memory, and it doesn't really matter as much how fast it is, but more and faster is always better. Anyway guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, it really means a lot to me. And if you have any questions and things that you want to see tested in an upcoming video, leave them in the description below and I will do it. For now though, massive thanks for watching, and if you want to watch more stuff, there is Instagram and Twitter, and if you want to support the channel, like the awesome people on your screen right now, there's a Patreon link. But for now, massive thanks for watching.